making chicken and dumpling soup, grilled cheese done 3 ways, a ham and Swiss, a ham and cheddar, and then a triple cheese one for me. And then we're gonna be making some sourdough discard pizza dough that we'll be using tonight to make some homemade pizzas. So let's start with getting our soup ready for our chicken and dumplings. So I'm gonna take 1 onion, we're gonna dice this up, and we'll put it in our little Dutch oven here. Today I'm using a slightly different Dutch oven. This is, it's by Le Creuset, but it's a cast iron Dutch oven, so it doesn't have the enamel coating on it. So I'm gonna put in a little bit of olive oil, and we're gonna let that heat up while we dice up our onion. So I'm gonna cut it in half. Then I'm gonna cut it about 4 or 5 times across because I'm gonna do kind of a small dice for our soup. And really right now we're just gonna make our base soup that I would use for either chicken and rice soup, chicken noodle soup, or chicken and dumplings. So it's just a base chicken noodle soup. And for thyme today, we're just gonna be using rotisserie, like shredded rotisserie chicken. But if you wanna make the best broth, a nice velvety broth, you wanna use chicken thighs. Those, the fat in the chicken thighs just make the best broth. But that will take a little bit longer to cook. So we're gonna just do some rotisserie chicken. So I've got my onions in the oil. And now we're gonna prep our celery and our carrots. So we need to give a quick peel on our carrots. And then, there we go. That way, because you don't want the skin on your carrot, it doesn't taste as nice, and it's a bit chewier. So we wanna have, there we go. And 1 more carrot for here. So we're just doing 3 big carrots. We're getting all of...
You got a question? What are you cooking today?
We are making chicken and dumpling soup. So we're gonna just make our base broth, which is what we would use for chicken noodle soup or chicken rice, or chicken and dumplings. So we're just gonna start by sauteing up some onions, and then we're gonna add in our carrots and celery as well. I'm gonna quarter my thicker parts of my carrots because I don't want to have super huge chunks in there. The dumplings are going to be the star of this soup. So we want all the other ones to kind of be smaller, easier to handle, because we're going to have some nice big fluffy dumplings on the top of our soup.
And besides the chicken and dumpling soup?
Oh yes, we're also going to be making grilled cheese is kind of done 3 ways. We're going to do a ham and Swiss, a ham and cheddar, and then like a triple cheese, grilled cheese. As well as making some sourdough pizza dough for tonight's dinner. We're gonna make some homemade pizzas tonight. We had another snow day here in Tennessee. It doesn't take much snow for us to get a snow day, so this is day 2. I'm up in the air whether they're gonna get a day 3 out of it, even though the roads are fairly clear. Subdivisions aren't always clear, especially ones that don't get a lot of sunlight. So we've had it where there's only been like 3 inches of snow, but the kids get like a whole week out. Okay.
So you got a question. Do you know what time tonight's supper stream is going to start?
Not 100%. It really kind of is, but maybe what we'll do is we could send out a post alert when we're getting maybe close to it. But I would say most likely around like 7:30ish. 7 is probably when we'll do it. It's really hard with our schedule to really nail down something. We've got 5 kids, and we just never know what's gonna happen. There. And now I took off the ends of my celery because when you already get pre-washed stalks, those can dry out and become really stringy. So I always chop those off. And I'm just gonna do a nice thin cut on these. There we go. Beautiful. And we're gonna toss these in with our onions, and we're gonna saute them all up. And I'm gonna give them a nice stir. And let them coat up nicely in the oil. I always have one that escapes. There we go. And then I'm gonna give it a little bit of ground black pepper. It's probably gonna be about a half a teaspoon. You don't need much. And then you're gonna throw in some thyme, about a teaspoon of thyme. You could use fresh or dried. So fresh, you probably use closer to 2 teaspoons. And then with dry, you use about 1. And then I'm gonna put in 2 bay leaves, but I'm gonna crumble them up when I put them in here. That's just gonna allow their flavors to come out a little bit faster. And then we're gonna give this a good stir. There's a lovely fragrant smell from the thyme. And this is going to be our broth base. Let those saute up in just a second. And let's get our chicken. I'm using, again, this is hand-pulled rotisserie chicken meat. I get it from Costco in bulk, but if you had rotisserie chicken, or if you had the time, chicken thighs with the skin on, you cook them up and then you just peel off the skin, shred it, and discard the bones. Makes for really delicious broth. There we go. But Costco has this, and I love it. It's just great for making soups and stews. Cuts out some extra time, especially when you're busy. The chunks of meat are very big though, so I am going to go through it and just give it a little chop. Perfect. There we go. And we're going to toss this in with that seasoning so it can get coated as well. A nice stir. Beautiful. And then I'm going to wash my hands. And then we're going to add in about 4 cups of water. Measuring cup here. We've got a big Pyrex measuring cup. And we want to just add enough liquid where we have an inch or 2 above our meat and vegetables. So I'm going to start with 4 cups. I might add 2 more. Give it a stir, and then I'm going to spread it out. Okay, I'm going to add a bit more because I want enough to be able to cook our dumplings in. We'll steam those in at the end. So I'm going to get about 2 more cups. We'll pour it in there. There we go. Perfect. And then I'm going to add a big heaping spoonful of Better Than Bouillon. If you were using chicken thighs, you could use less of that because the chicken thighs would give it a bit more flavor than the bouillon.
You have a question, what's for dinner? I think they're referring to this, but
yes.
You can answer both.
Yes, so we are making chicken and dumplings, soup, and then we're going to do kind of grilled cheeses three ways, a ham and Swiss, a ham and cheddar, and then a triple cheese. And then we're also going to make our pizza dough, our sourdough pizza dough for tonight, and we'll let it ferment on the and proof on the counter. So I'm mixing in a big scoop of chicken bouillon. Again, I like to use chicken bouillon over chicken broth because it adds a bit more flavor And I use it in place of salt, so I don't add extra salt. And it just gives a richer chicken flavor. And we're gonna let this simmer. And let's start on our doughs. We're gonna be making 2 doughs. So I'm just gonna clean up my scraps here so that they're not in the way. And we're gonna start out with our sourdough pizza dough for tonight so that it can start to proof and rise. Okay. And then we'll make our dumpling dough for our chicken and dumplings. So for our sourdough, we are going to start out with 2 cups of active starter. So in here, you guys can see nice and bubbly. I fed it last night at like 12:30 at night. So it's nice and bubbly and alive. I've got 2 jars of it. So I'm gonna use a bit from each so that I have, I don't completely drain my starter. But I literally fed them both last night. And we're gonna do 2 cups. I forgot to grab my measuring cup. 2 cups of active starter. You've got to have active starter or your pizza dough will not rise at all. So I'm gonna I'm gonna use a cup from each jar. Perfect. And you might want to make sure you have a nice bubbly starter or it won't rise. Perfect. So I've got a cup for my big one. And now we're going to use a cup from this guy. And these are actually the same starter. I just added and started proofing and fermenting and feeding in a larger jar. So I have plenty to use because we go through a lot of starter in here. We use a lot of it for discard recipes and making sourdough bread about every 2 days. We make 2 loaves. So we use it a lot. So I've got my 2 cups of active starter. I'm just gonna cover these guys back up.
Yeah, we buy a lot less bread now.
Yes, I've kind of factored it out that each loaf of sourdough bread that I make costs me about $1.75. And if I buy that same loaf at the store, that's about $6. So it's pretty good savings, especially when we go through about 2 loaves every 2 to 3 days. Then we have our active starter. I'm gonna add 1.5 cups of warm water. So you wanna make sure you use warm water because this is gonna help the flour incorporate. We're gonna mix in our warm water. And I'm gonna scoop this off because I'm going to use my dough whisk for this. The dough whisk is a lifesaver when you're starting to incorporate flour. So I'm gonna give this a good stir and to incorporate it nicely. Perfect. And then before we add our flour, we're gonna add in a teaspoon of honey, 3 teaspoons of salt, and about 4 teaspoons of oil to it. And I'm just gonna eyeball it, but you guys can totally measure out if you want. I think once you get really used to cooking and understanding measurements, it's about easier. But it's about a teaspoon of honey, which is going to add to, for our pizza crust, it's gonna give it a nice golden color when it cooks up. And 3 teaspoons of salt, which is going to, so that's 1, 2, 3, and that's gonna give it the nice flavor. And then 4 teaspoons of olive oil. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And I always mix my wet ingredients, everything like that together before I add in my flour, because once you add your flour in, it's hard to add anything else in where it's thoroughly mixed. There we go. And this is going to make about, it would be 2 16-inch pizzas, but I have my pizza stone smaller, so it's gonna be about 4, smaller pizzas. Now we're gonna add in 5 cups of flour, but I forgot to grab my flour. So 5 cups of all-purpose unbleached flour. You want to make sure you use unbleached so that you can have that fermentation process to continue. So we want 5 cups of flour. So I'm just going to scoop these in. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then I'm just gonna use my dough whisk to mix it up. And the beauty of this dough whisk is it's so much easier and incorporates it so much better than using like a spoon or a paddle, because it allows the dough to kind of process through. Beautiful. Okay. So we have this mixing. Now I'm gonna let it sit for a few minutes before I knead it into some balls for our pizza dough, but I want it to kind of hydrate into the flour. So I've got a bit of a shaggy dough right here. It's not super dry, it's once I press it together, but before I do that, I wanted to let it sit and hydrate. That's why we use the warm water. The warm water is gonna allow the flour to absorb much better. So we're gonna let it sit for a little bit, then we're gonna knead it into our balls for our pizza and let it proof.
A question, what are you making for
We
right
are
now?
making chicken and dumplings soup. We've got our soup broth going right now for our chicken and dumplings. It's just celery, onions, carrots, shredded rotisserie chicken, thyme, bay leaf, rosemary, or not rosemary, and better than bouillon. So easy, yummy broth that's cooking. We're gonna make our dumplings, then we're gonna make some grilled cheeses, and then we'll knead out our pizza dough for tonight. Okay, so we are now going to make our dumpling dough. We are going to start out with, let's do the milk, let's do the wet, and then we'll add the flour in. So we need 3/4 of a cup of milk. I'm using whole milk, mainly because that's what we have around our house with the little ones. Everyone seems to love whole milk. And then I'm going to add in 2 tablespoons of melted butter. This is going to give a really rich texture to our dumplings. We'll mix that in nicely. And then I'm just gonna use my dough hook from before to mix it. This is gonna help us incorporate it. We've got our milk and our butter coming together. And where's my salt? I'm going to use about a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. You don't need too much. And my baking powder. We're gonna put in a big tablespoon of baking powder. This is gonna allow your dumplings to puff up in the broth as they cook. So we need 1 big tablespoon of baking powder. You want to use baking powder, not baking soda. Baking powder is a mixture of cornstarch and baking soda and has less of a rising agent in it. I bet you if you use baking soda, you'd probably have huge spongy balls. We're gonna mix them together until all of that baking soda is kind of dissolved into the water. And then, before we add the flour in, I like to use some fresh parsley in my dumpling dough because it adds a pop of color and a lovely flavor to it. So I'm going to, let's see if you can see that better. I'm going to mince up, and this is gonna be about 1 compacted tablespoon of parsley or 2 just lightly filled tablespoons of minced parsley. And you wanna mince this up fine, and we're gonna mix this in, and then we're going to add in our flour for our chicken and dumplings. Beautiful. Okay. And so I'm going over it several times, and now we have gotten it all minced up really nicely in a fine flaky mixture. And we're gonna add this to our mixture here for our dumpling mix. Stir it in, and this is just going to add a nice little pop of green in it and a little bit of a nice flavor. Okay, now we are going to mix in 1.5 cups of flour. Again, using all-purpose flour. I always use the unbleached because I make so much sourdough. Okay. So we've got 1 And now we need about a half a cup, a little bit more. There we go. Perfect. And I'm gonna give it a nice stir to combine it.
You got a question, where are you from?
Well, right now we live just outside of Nashville in Tennessee. I'm originally from Iowa, up north, but right now I've lived in Tennessee for several years. I guess I lived in Iowa until I was 10. Then we moved to right outside of Nashville. And then I went back to Iowa for undergrad at Iowa State. Go Cyclones. And then I went back to Nashville for graduate school at Vanderbilt for my master's and my doctorate. And I just have never left. I love it here. Here is our beautiful dumpling dough. And we'll be spooning that into our broth in just a second. Okay, so I'm gonna give it a sign. You wanna make sure your broth has a lovely simmer on it before you put your dumplings in. If it's not boiling and simmering, it won't rise up. So I'm just going to take these, and you can just spoon it in. I'm just gonna give it a slight roll. I don't wanna push it in, but just a slight roll to make my little dumplings. And we're just gonna pop them in here, just a gentle roll. And then they're gonna cook up to the top and get nice and fluffy in our broth. There we go. And then I'll put the lid on while they simmer, and they'll be done. They take about 15 minutes or so in our broth to cook. If they make them a lot bigger, they'll take longer, but they don't take too long to cook. So by the time we are done making our grilled cheeses and kneading out our pizza dough, our chicken and dumpling soup will be done.
Hey, you have a question. How long do you leave the dumplings in the soup until it's done?
Yeah, 15 minutes is about all it takes. So in 15 minutes, they should be nice and fluffy and ready to eat. And then they'll just stay in your soup until you finish eating your soup. But that's all it needs to kind of cook up and get nice and fluffy. And you can see they like sink in and then they start to puff up. So that's why I like to use a pot that has kind of a bigger surface area, but doesn't necessarily as deep. And that way all of my dumplings can kind of rise up and puff up to the top. We've just got a couple more of these, and we'll have our yummy chicken and dumpling soup. And what you do is, once I have all of these in, you are going to put the lid on, and you're gonna just let them steam with the lid on, and that just helps cook the tops as well.
You have a question? Is it okay to use biscuit dough, or do you need to make your own for this?
You can use biscuit dough. It will be very similar, a slightly different texture, but I've seen so many people use biscuit dough, and it works well with it as well. So I always make my own because it's actually pretty simple. Okay, I'm just gonna toss some of those. And now we're gonna put our lid on, and we're going to let it simmer. And that's gonna allow our dough to work up. Now, before we get on to kneading our pizza dough, let's start on our grilled cheeses so they can cook while we do our kneads in the process. So I have, for here, we've got our traditional sourdough, and we have some rosemary and garlic. So we'll do, let me open this guy up. I'm gonna have mine on traditional. This is one we baked up a couple nights ago. And this is my basic recipe. I have that recipe card posted. And then this is my rosemary and garlic. You can see that one's almost gone. Okay, so we're gonna be making 3 sandwiches today. I'm gonna start cutting our sourdough bread. And now you could always use store-bought if you want, but if you are into making it or thinking about making it, it's really not difficult to make sourdough. It just takes a lot of time. And when I say it takes a lot of time, it's not a lot of active time. It's a lot of just sitting and waiting time. Papa, do you want the garlic rosemary or do you want the sourdough? Which one?
I don't know. Whichever.
Okay. Let's see. Well, I'll let you have the special bread. He likes this one. We don't have much of it left, but I've got enough for him to have a sandwich in it. There we go. And his choices. Sometimes it's hard to make your choices with which bread you're going to use.
You got a question, how long does it take to make sourdough bread?
Well, if you already have the starter, then it's about 2 days, really. Or, you know, like one whole day, and then you could cook it the following night. If you don't have the starter, then it's going to be about 10 days before you can have sourdough bread, because it takes about a week, give or take, to have your starter fermented to the point where it will then ferment the dough or the flour in it. So, and that can have lots of factors. If your house is colder than normal, it will take a little bit longer for it to ferment versus if your house is a little bit warmer. So if you keep yours around, I would say 70, 72, it's about a week. If you keep your temperature a little colder than that, it's gonna take a little longer, a little warmer, a little faster, because heat increases the fermentation process. So we're just spreading a little bit of room softened butter on things. I'm just doing it on one side of each slice of bread because that's just gonna be the slice that's going to be facing griddle down. Okay, and so you don't need to butter the insides because we'll have plenty of yummy cheese on the inside. And then we'll get this is the garlic and the rosemary. And we've got this guy covering up. Perfect. And the reason I don't butter my griddle or my skillet, I just put the butter on the bread, because otherwise if you butter on here, you're gonna have areas that aren't touching the skillet and that will burn. Okay. So that one's yours, Leno's, and mine. And my husband is going to have a ham and cheddar. Cheddar is his favorite cheese. So we're gonna start with his, so I can keep, his is the one with the special bread. And when you're putting your cheese on here, you just wanna make sure your cheese isn't overlapping onto the over your bread, because then it will just melt down on your skillet and burn. And turn it down just a little. Look at that, beautiful. You see how they're really pooping up and they're simmering? So I'm just gonna turn it down and let a little air escape out of it so I don't get a boil over. My daughter is gonna have ham and Swiss. She loves bougie grilled cheeses as we do. And if I can open it. So she likes ham and Swiss. I don't understand the people's love of Swiss cheese. I think it's a very bland cheese.
And when are you making more sourdough loaves?
I'm gonna feed my starters, and I might work on one tonight so that I'll have to be ready for tomorrow to cook it up. So that will be, I think tonight when we do dinner and do pizza, I'm gonna start on some new sourdough loaves. And then I'm gonna be doing triple cheese for mine. So I'm gonna be using a little bit of Gouda. Gouda's my favorite cheese. And a little bit more steam out so it doesn't boil over. And then I'm gonna use Munster. So I've got Gouda, Munster, and cheddar on mine. I love cheese. So I always love, one of my favorite things to do is like a triple cheese, grilled cheese. It's just so much better. My other two, they're having ham on yours. When you are doing ham on your, if you're doing a melt, you don't want to put a super thick layer, otherwise your cheese won't melt up. So I'm just going to do a nice thin layer of ham across. We'll do about 5 pieces over here, not too thick, because if it's too thick, it won't ever warm up. And then my daughter will do about 3 on hers, because she doesn't like it as meaty. And now we're gonna come back with our next layers of cheese. So I'm gonna add a 3rd layer of cheese to mine, which is going to be cheddar. on there. So this is going to be Gouda, Munster, and cheddar. And then my husband will also have his second layer of cheddar. There we go. You kind of have to do a little bit of like a mosaic here of the cheeses because you really don't want it to overflow because then you're just gonna burn your cheeses and that's never good. And then my daughter will have some more Swiss on hers. Just gonna break it a little bit. Perfect. And now we're gonna go back with our things. I've turned my skillet up to about a 7 and we're going to allow them to start to cook. And when we do our grilled cheeses, we do multiple flips so that we have the first kind of the stage is to kind of warm up and melt the butter and keep the bread and start the melting process. And then the second flip is to get the nice, yummy, golden crisp on it. Okay, let's clear this out so we can knead our dough into 4 balls. Let me get a paper towel. Because I want it's a little bit wet, and that's okay. I'll get this out of here. And, okay, so here is our sourdough bread. You can see it's already gotten a little bit more moist because the flour is hydrating. The water, they're starting to rehydrate. And we're gonna keep this bowl because I'm gonna put my 4 balls in there, cover it, and we'll let it sit on here. So we wanna kind of do the fold and press, fold and press. And then we'll do a couple stretches in a little bit. But first I'm just making it all combine nicely.
You just got a comment that someone loves your kitchen.
Oh, thank you. You know, 2 years ago, I did not have as nice of a kitchen, but we woke up, it was the day before school started for the year, and my dishwasher, the whole thing, everything was flooding out from underneath the cabinets. And so they had to rip everything out, and then we found mold. So then we had to get a new kitchen, which was wonderful, except I was 7 months pregnant with a high-risk pregnancy. So that wasn't so wonderful to not have a kitchen, a laundry room, or a dining room during that period. And that was with 4, and then we added our 5th kid. So here are our 4 balls. Now we're gonna do the traditional stretch and fold with them. So we're gonna stretch and fold, and you simply take it from each corner, and we're gonna stretch and fold, stretch and fold. And this is just gonna get rid of any of those big bubbles that can form during our baking process. So here will be for our first pizza dough loaf.
And that makes what, like a 8-9 inch pizza?
Yeah, 8-9 inch. It makes a pretty good sized pizza. Sometimes I'll cut them in half for my little ones, and then they'll have smaller personal pizzas. We'll do that. So we've got our first one, and now we're gonna do the stretch, fold, stretch, fold, stretch and fold, stretch and fold. And now we're gonna just roll it up and kind of pinch into the bottom into our little ball. So we've got 2. I hear my butter starting to sizzle, so we're gonna flip these guys, because that means the butter is started to melt, and we'll start warming up our other side for it to melt and warm up the bread. Nice. Okay. And now we're gonna go back and we're gonna do our stretch and fold. This is the same with making our sourdough bread. This is kind of that stretch and fold. It's a really key process to really prevent those huge bubbles from forming. And stretch. And you kind of do it the 4 corners, and then I just form it into little balls. Perfect. And last one. So stretch and fold, stretch and fold, stretch and fold, stretch and fold. And then we're gonna mix it around, and I pinch it into the balls. not even gonna worry about cleaning out my bowl. We'll do that later. I'm just gonna put a little bit of oil in here. And we're just gonna kind of do this. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my ball and just kind of roll it around in it. And same with this one. I'm gonna roll it. And this is just gonna help it when it rises, not really stick to the other balls or to the side. So we've got our 4 balls in here.
You have a question? Do you go live every day?
We try to go live every day. Most days we go live for lunchtime and for dinner, unless our schedule doesn't allow it or we're out of town. But we do try to go live every single day. Here, I think they're ready for their next flip, and then we'll cover that up. I always am listening, making sure I can hear the butter sizzling. Okay. Now we're going to, I'm going to move this guy over here because that pan is hotter over there. There we go. Now we're doing it for the full crisp up and the melt. So I'm going to turn my heat down just a little because you don't want it to cook up too fast before it has a chance to melt. And then I'm just going to put a little bit of press and seal over the top of my bowl. You could use a cloth if you want. I find press and seal works great because it really does help keep in that moisture to prevent it from drying out. And perfect. It sticks nicely on there. And we're just gonna let this sit on our counter for about 6 hours, or 4, it's between 4 and 6 hours. And it's just gonna ferment naturally. I'm gonna wash my hands. Okay. Now, while we're waiting for our grilled cheese to flip up, we're gonna feed our starters so that they will be ready to make some bread later tonight. So here's our sourdough starters. Let's see. And what I do when I'm feeding them is I use equal parts flour and equal parts water. Okay. So, we'll run on the low, but we're gonna see what we can get out of this one. This is unbleached flour. So I'm gonna put 1 in each, one at a time. So 1, 2, 3, 4.
And do you have to feed it every time you use it, or how long can you wait?
Yeah, I like to feed it every time I use it just because I'm replacing what I took. I'm gonna flip my grilled cheese and then I'm gonna grab my other jar of flour. Perfect. We're getting a nice, lovely golden crust on these. Perfect. Let's get this guy. This one needs a little more on that side. Let's switch it over here. I've got a jar of flour over here. So I put 4 so far in each one. I typically do either 5 or 10 depending on how much I used. So I'm going to put in, there's 5, 6, 7. I have to count out loud or I'll forget. 8, 9, and 10. I typically do it in 5s or 10 because tablespoons are equivalent to 15 milliliters, so I can just add 150 milliliters of water.
So you said you always do it right away, but how long can you wait?
You can, if you are in the fridge, keeping it in the fridge, it can wait a week between feedings. If you are keeping it on the counter, it can be up to 2 to 3 days between feedings.
Okay.
But you risk, if you leave it on the counter, not feeding it often, you risk it molding. So that's why every time I use it, I feed it. If I know I'm not gonna use it, I pop it in the fridge and that way I'm safe. Now we're gonna add 150 milligrams of water to each one. Let's see, 150 is equal to 10 tablespoons because there's 15 milligrams in a milliliters in a tablespoon. And that's why I keep it easy, because then it's simple math. You're just multiplying by 10. Perfect. And then before we do that, I just don't want to burn our grilled cheeses. Beautiful. They're cooking up lovely. Excellent. These are almost done. I can take this off. Oh, look at that, beautiful. We've got a nice thick gravy forming on our chicken and dumplings. So we'll stir these up, and then
for feeding, it's tablespoons, not teaspoons, right?
Yes, tablespoons.
Okay.
So when I'm making my starter, I use my scale and I'm a lot more exact. I do have videos posted on the link on our page for the 7 days that it takes to make our starter. But once I'm done making it and it's gotten to the nice fermenting process, I then just use tablespoons equal of flour and water to feed it. And I either do it in 5 or 10 at a time, depending on how much starter I've used or discard I've used for a recipe. That way I always have starter because I use it about every single day to make stuff. Okay, I think these are ready. Now we've got beautiful, oh, perfect. Okay, let's get under there, perfect. Gonna turn these off, slide them off on the heat for just a second, and then I'm gonna stir this up, and then we will serve up our chicken and dumplings and our grilled cheese. When you mix it, you just mix it until all of the flour and the water has combined. And the flour is essentially, that's the food for it. It's the gluten in it, or the glucose from the simple carbohydrate.
You have a question? She heard that sink water isn't good and you use fresh filtered water to make it last. Is that true?
Our sink has a filtration system on it. We have it underneath there, so I use that. As long as your town's tap water is good, I think it should be fine. It's safe to drink. But I mean, I think that's a personal preference. If you want to use that, you can. I don't think it will impact it all too much. I think it's just personal preference.
But at the same time, we're not quite sure because ours is filtered.
Yeah, we use filter, so that's not okay. And get my chicken and dumplings. Okay, so this one, I'm starting even to see the beautiful, gooey, cheesy melt on this. Perfect. Like a beautiful golden crust both sides. Lovely melt. So that's mine. We've got the triple cheddar, or the triple cheese. And then these are our beautiful chicken and dumplings. You see how they like cook off to make a nice thick gravy from it? Perfect. So I'm gonna just scoop up, get a nice scoop of the broth underneath. Beautiful. And then let's get a nice dumpling on top and another dumpling. So here is our lovely chicken and dumpling soup with our triple grilled cheese. And let me give a nice little cut into our grilled cheese so we can see the pretty melt. Because this is the best part. It's the cheese pull that you want to see. Look at that. Gooey, perfect peat cheese pull. So I'm going to take a bite. Excellent. Oh, I'm sorry, Bruni. Well, guys, thank you for joining us today. We try to do live cooking shows. Don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us. We love it when you guys comment and send us questions about cooking or recipes that you want to make. This was actually a request from somebody. They wanted chicken and dumplings. But again, thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe.